The room went quiet before anyone clapped. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the announcement. Not the name that wasn't mine. The silence. I was sitting 3 rows back in the glass-walled conference room at Helix Dynamics, hands folded neatly on my notebook, already rehearsing how I'd thank the team. My manager, Victor Hale, stood at the front with his usual polished smile, the kind that made executives feel safe and juniors feel small. "We're excited to announce our new operations lead for the Atlas rollout," he said. I straightened. "Please congratulate Ethan Brooks." Applause followed, late, uneven. I watched Ethan stand up, visibly startled, like he'd just been handed luggage at the wrong airport. He adjusted his tie, nodded awkwardly, and smiled at Victor as if asking, "Is this really happening?" Victor smiled back. 6 months of my life compressed into a single weightless second. I didn't blink. I didn't move. My chest didn't tighten the way movies promise it will. Instead, something inside me clicked off, like a breaker flipped somewhere behind my ribs. 2 weeks earlier, Victor had stood beside my desk while I was rebuilding a failed supplier's schedule at 9:40 p.m. "If Atlas launches clean," he'd said casually, "this role is yours. I need someone I can trust." I trusted that sentence. I trusted it enough to miss birthdays, enough to sleep on my office couch, enough to answer calls at dawn and emails at midnight, enough to become invisible. Now Ethan was shaking hands at the front of the room, already being congratulated for a project he'd joined during its final phase. Someone behind me whispered, "Wait, wasn't this yours?" I kept my eyes forward. Victor glanced in my direction once, just once. Not long enough to meet my eyes, long enough to confirm I was still sitting down, still compliant, still quiet. The meeting ended with scraping chairs and forced smiles. People avoided looking at me as they filed out, like grief might be contagious. One analyst brushed past and murmured, "I'm so sorry." I nodded, because that was easier than speaking. I walked back to my desk, sat down, opened a blank document. The office hummed around me, keyboards, printers, the distant laugh from Victor's office. My fingers hovered for a moment. Then I typed 2 sentences. No anger, no explanation, just facts. I printed the page and stood. Victor looked irritated when I knocked, like I'd interrupted something important. I placed the paper on his desk. He frowned, opened it, and started reading. Halfway down, his face changed. "Wait," he said, standing up. "This isn't funny." "It's not a joke," I replied. And that's when I realized he finally understood. But it was already too late. Victor laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, like the sound itself might rewind the moment. "You're resigning?" he said. "Right now?" "Yes." He looked past me, toward the glass wall, toward the floor where people were still moving between desks. "You're emotional," he said quickly. "Let's not make permanent decisions over temporary disappointment." Temporary. The word slid over months of weekends, late nights, and swallowed pride like they were crumbs on his desk. "You promised me the operations lead role if Atlas launched clean," I said. My voice surprised me. Steady, almost detached. Victor sighed and rubbed his forehead. "We talked about opportunities, not guarantees." I reached into my bag and placed my phone beside the letter. One tap, an email filled the screen. "If Atlas goes live with 0 escalations, the lead position is yours. I need you on this." His words, his signature. Victor stared at the screen longer than he meant to. Then he pushed the phone away with 2 fingers. "You're taking that out of context." "There is no other context." He stood up, pacing now. "Do you have any idea how this looks? Walking out like this? People will think you couldn't handle not getting your way." I watched him carefully. The concern wasn't about me. It was about optics, control. "Ethan can't run Atlas," I said. "He doesn't know the vendor history. He doesn't know why we bypassed Delta components or why the Frankfurt client nearly walked." Victor stopped pacing. "You're right," he said quietly, "which is why you're not going anywhere." There it was, the truth, finally unmasked. "You'll help transition him," Victor continued. "A few weeks, maybe a month, then we'll revisit your role. I'll make it right." I shook my head. "You already made your decision." His voice hardened. "If you leave now, you're burning bridges." "I didn't light the match," I said. For the first time, his confidence cracked. "Think about your reputation, about stability, about how this industry talks. I stepped back toward the door. Think about why you need me so badly now. Silence stretched between us. You can't do this, he said again, softer this time. Atlas falls apart without you. I met his eyes. That sounds like a management problem. I opened the door. Behind me, Victor called my name, but not loudly, not urgently, like someone hoping a situation might still fix itself without effort. It didn't. I walked out past my desk, past the project board still labeled in my handwriting, past co-workers frozen in place, as if they sensed something irreversible had just happened. By the time the elevator doors closed, my hands were shaking, not from fear, from relief. And somewhere above us, Victor Hale was realizing something he never expected to learn. The people you take for granted are the ones holding everything up. I lasted 3 days without checking my work email. On the fourth morning, my phone buzzed while I was pouring coffee. A notification slipped onto the screen like it had every right to be there. Ethan Brooks. Hey. Quick question. Do you remember why we moved the Atlas supplier audit ahead of Q3? I'm getting conflicting notes. I stared at the message longer than necessary. Then I locked the screen and set the phone face down on the counter. 10 minutes later, another buzz. Victor Hale. We need to talk. Call me. I didn't. By noon, LinkedIn lit up with quiet distress signals. A planner I used to work with messaged, things are getting chaotic. A quality engineer wrote, do you know where the escalation matrix is? Victor says you had it. I had, past tense. I went for a walk instead. No headset, no podcasts, just the sound of my shoes on concrete and the strange absence of urgency. For the first time in months, no one needed me to fix anything. That afternoon, an email slipped into my personal inbox from a client. We've noticed delays and inconsistent updates on the Atlas rollout. You were always our primary contact. Can you clarify what's changed? I typed slowly. I'm no longer with Helix Dynamics. You'll need to coordinate with their current operations lead. The reply came 5 minutes later. Understood. That explains a lot. That night, I slept through my phone vibrating on the nightstand. In the morning, I found 3 missed calls from Victor and 1 voicemail I didn't open. Instead, I opened my laptop and updated my RSUM. For the first time, I didn't minimize what I'd done. I wrote exactly what I led, exactly what I fixed, exactly what I carried. 2 weeks passed. Then an unfamiliar number called. Is this Lena Morales? A man asked. Yes, this is Andrew Klein from Meridian Systems. We were referred to you by a European logistics client who spoke very highly of your work on Atlas. I sat down slowly. They said you handled an international rollout under extreme constraints, he continued. We have an operations director role opening next quarter. I'd like to talk. After we scheduled the call, I sat in silence, staring at the wall. At Helix, Atlas was unraveling. I knew it without checking. You don't remove the keystone and expect the arch to hold. The messages kept coming. Confused, frantic, unanswered. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. And somewhere, Victor was still telling people everything was under control, while quietly realizing he'd built his credibility on someone who no longer worked for him. The reckoning was just beginning. The interview with Meridian Systems was nothing like Helix. No rapid-fire interrogation. No veiled tests. Andrew asked me one question and then let the silence do the rest. Tell me about a time you held a system together when leadership failed. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't name Victor. I talked about decisions, trade-offs, accountability, about how processes don't break first, people do. Andrew listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, writing nothing down. At the end, he said, "You sound like someone who's been doing a director's job without the title." I smiled. I have. 2 days later, Meridian made an offer. Real authority, real compensation, no vague promises, everything in writing. I accepted. The same afternoon, Helix finally cracked. A former colleague forwarded me a message chain by accident or maybe on purpose. Victor was scrambling. Deadlines missed. A supplier reinstated that should have stayed blacklisted. A client threatening penalties. Ethan was overwhelmed, asking basic questions he shouldn't have needed to ask. Then came the audit. Not the dramatic kind with boardrooms and spotlights. The quiet kind. Data reviews, report comparisons, questions about why. Victor's quarterly summaries didn't match operational logs. An internal compliance officer emailed me directly. We're reviewing discrepancies related to Atlas. Your name appears frequently in workflow documentation. Would you be willing to clarify your role? I agreed. I didn't editorialize. I didn't accuse. I sent records, emails, timelines, change approvals with timestamps. Facts don't need tone. 2 days later, the officer called back. Thank you, she said. This helps us understand where attribution may have been misaligned. Misaligned. A careful word for stolen. The final message from Victor arrived that evening. You didn't have to do this. I read it once, then deleted it, because I hadn't done anything. I had stopped protecting him from the truth. The call came the following Monday morning, while I was setting up my new office at Meridian. Victor Hale has been removed from his leadership position, the compliance officer said. Further review is ongoing. I hung up and looked around the room. Sunlight. A desk that was mine. A role that didn't require me to disappear to earn it. Helix didn't fall because I left. It fell because it was hollow. And Victor finally learned the difference between owning work and standing on someone else's. I went back to arranging my desk. There was nothing left to prove. 3 months into my role at Meridian, my phone stopped feeling like a threat. No late-night pings. No panic-drenched voicemails. No sudden emergencies disguised as quick questions. Work ended when the day ended, and for the first time in years, my evenings belonged to me. One Friday afternoon, as I was packing up, Andrew stopped by my office. The board approved the expansion, he said. They want you leading it. I felt the weight of the words, not heavy, just solid, earned. That night, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. Helix Dynamics. Internal communications. Victor Hale has formally exited the company following a completed compliance review. Certain performance reports have been rescinded. No apology. No explanation. Just closure. A second email followed a few minutes later. This one was personal. It was from Ethan. I didn't know what I was stepping into, he wrote. I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry. I read it carefully before replying. I hope you learn from it, I typed. That's all any of us can do. I never heard from him again. A week later, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox at Meridian. Inside was a handwritten note signed by 3 former Helix employees. You showed us what professionalism looks like when no one's watching, it read. Thank you for not becoming what broke the system. I folded the note and placed it in my drawer. Revenge didn't come as fireworks or public humiliation. It came quietly, in offers made without begging, in meetings where my voice carried weight, in the absence of fear. Victor once told me my value was in being indispensable. He was wrong. My value was in knowing when to walk away. Somewhere at Helix, processes were being rewritten, titles reassigned, lessons learned too late. That wasn't my concern anymore. I had kept the only promise that mattered, the one I made to myself the moment I stood up, placed that letter on his desk, and chose dignity over permission. And that was more satisfying than any applause ever could be.